thin and all the rest of it. But one of the things when we talk about that it's really light and really thin, it's not just the thinness that makes it light. It's the fact that its specific gravity is about 1.15. What does that mean? Well, it means compared to a standard lens, so if we've got we'll take our +3 example, looks a bit like that sort of thing. If we were using this in a 1.5 index material, which has a specific gravity of about 1.25, what it says is it's going to have about that thickness and it's going to weigh so many grams. When we actually take our material that is a 1.53, first of all we've made the lens slightly thinner. So that in itself, by making it about 10% thinner, has made it potentially 10% lighter. But then the material itself, even if it was the same volume, it's actually about 10 to 15% lighter material than standard plastic. So hence that makes it very light, mildly thinner and very light. And plus, because of these other particular properties, it's actually got chemical resistance, scratch resistance. We can talk about impact resistance, and we might not get too much technical into that, and I generally talk about it in terms of how much more impact resistant it is compared to the standard material. But you know, it's about 8 times more impact resistant than a 1.5. And 1.5 is reasonably impact resistant. 1.5 is like 5 to 6 times more impact resistant than glass, even chemically hardened glass. So we're talking about, you know, it depends on the reference, I suppose. And so a lot of these things, when we talk about things, actually again, you've got a reference to something. In the old days, I suppose, the classic example of referencing things, going right back in ancient times, a foot was based on measuring how big the king's foot was, and if the bloke was a small king and he wanted to make sure that everyone felt he was actually a relatively big bloke, he used to fudge the numbers and make the foot nice and big, because then everyone thought he must be some giant, the king must be powerful. It's only a reference number in some ways, and some things are absolutes. But basically what you can see with that sort of feature is that material is going to be both light and thin. So when it comes to the descriptions that are on the side of the pricing guide, they actually all come from the fact that these materials have certain properties. How thick they are, how heavy they are to a certain weight, and all the rest of it. So it does get a bit technical, and you don't necessarily need to know these reference numbers or all the rest of it. You need to have a sense of index and what it means to be thinner, but you can see that sometimes, for instance, depending on the lens, sometimes with the specific gravities, you can go up to the next thickness up, and it might be thinner, but it might not be that much lighter, because the next material up might have a specific gravity of 1.2. So it, you know, what you gained on one, you lost on the other, your overall one, but it might be lighter, but not that much lighter than the next material, but it will look cosmetically a lot thinner. So there are different features and different benefits of things. As a general rule though, there's not a huge difference in the specific gravities. The index is what makes more difference, but there are other features which we'll talk about, like aspheric and how things are made to it, and grind versus non-grind to make differences in thickness. Okay.
So when would you pick one over the other if there's not a great deal of...
So basically a lot of it's guided by, I guess, the overall properties. And this is where we come back to probably lifestyle dispensing. You've got to know what people are after. If someone's a little old lady, but they wear their glasses all the time, but their skin is starting to get soft and thin, which again, as we age, our skin gets thinner.
Yeah, all right, don't look at me.
So what you can actually have, obviously, at that point in time is they're wearing the glasses a lot, they perhaps have a fairly significant prescription, so that what they need is a really, what's important for them is not necessarily that it's cosmetically tough, it doesn't need to be impact resistant, it doesn't need a whole heap of other features, but the feature that they particularly want is it needs to be very light. And so obviously frame fitting is critically important, and frame selection to help guide that, but then your material selection would be about lightness. You're going to want to go for the lightest results you can get. And generally that will also correlate with thinness. But for instance, in that situation, you might be more likely to go one material over another in that situation. And we'll go through a little bit about that selection a bit more. But that sort of gives you a guide, whereas someone else, they want tough and impact resistant. They don't want it to look thick and ugly or anything, but it's more about the performance of the toughness, which is why you may choose that material.
On and off all the time.
Yeah, over another material, something like that. So in that case, they're probably not as concerned about, so again, they might be more likely to give them a 153, whereas the other lady might give them a 16, because the 16 will be a little bit lighter again, whereas the farmer, you go 153, they're not as concerned about the cosmetics. They still want it to be light, but they're more concerned about the fact that it's going to be durable. So there are some materials that sort of tick the boxes for a lot of clients. You can go, oh well, really that one's pretty good for a lot of people. But there's other materials that are not so. Other features of the materials are whether it's suitable for rimless or not, and that comes down to the features with the lenses about how easy it is to snap or break or chip. It's the chipability of the material at the edge to see whether it will chip with the groove in the nylon. Because obviously on the edge of the lens, what they've actually had to do is actually cut a little groove to run the nylon in.
Yeah, I saw that. I was amazed by that.
And so that's where it goes in. So which is quite, cool in itself. And then that nylon thread goes through there. Now, if you've got a material that chips very easily like glass, now it is technically possible to do glass, and even CR39 1.5 can be done, but we prefer not to do that, because obviously the chances if they put them down on the table or something like that a bit roughly, or again the kids get to them or they get a bit of a bump, we're more likely to have those edges chip off, and then the nylon
exposed.
Yeah, it's exposed and slipping out in the front, losing the lens and having also indeed not looking cosmetically nice because they've got the little chips and it's not smooth on the edge.
Is that why we polish them?
Polish does help, but the polishing doesn't really change the chipping a lot. The polishing is to give a nice, flat, even finish so that it doesn't, because otherwise often when the material's cut it looks quite opaque and sort of quite noticeable. We've gone for a rimless so it's not noticeable, and you want to actually keep that edge nice and clean and clear so it's polished up. It's more a cosmetic function than necessarily about stopping the lens to chip. But so different materials have different properties with chipping. 1.5 chips moderately easily compared to say 1.53 or 1.6. So whereas glass, for instance, chips very easily. So it is acceptable to do this under certain circumstances where we have no other product option available. There's sometimes when we select some of the extended focus ones, sometimes they don't make some of those ones in other materials that are going to be acceptable. Or the next material up is they might only have it in a 1.5 and a 1.67, and that might put the price up, $160 for the client for a pair of readers that they're pretty gentle with, and they're in the office and they're
only wear at home.
Only going to wear at home, and they're fairly gentle with them. As long as you're worn and explain, we generally wouldn't recommend that for most, but you're good with your glasses. You have to just be careful on the edge, not to chip. It is acceptable to do this. We generally would move one of these materials, but in the lens that's going to be best for your purposes, with the frame you've selected, is going to be that, and that may help guide them to say, well, maybe I'll go for a full frame and that sort of thing. Or maybe it'll mean that you go and use a different extended focus lens because, for instance, like the interview is available on a 1.6, whereas a PC Pro extended focus, which again is on your handout, it's only available in the 1.5. There's another one that we used to use, which was available in 1.5 or 1.67, and it wasn't available in any other material in between. So just sometimes availability may guide us one way or the other. So hence you've got those features of impact resistance or chipability. I suppose it's how well the material flexes without chipping and breaking. Okay, and so these sorts of materials are obviously best for rimless. Are typically this. Whereas once we get into this is acceptable for rimless and it's better than that, but it's not quite as good as those ones. So you will sort of find that certain materials have, and again, when we go through the guide there, all the language